I never imagined that a simple piece of paper tacked to my front door would lead to one of the most satisfying acts of revenge I'd ever experienced. But there it was, a wedding invitation. Not addressed to me, mind you, but listing my historic family home as the venue for some stranger's nuptials. At first, I thought it was a bizarre prank. But the crisp cream-colored paper with its embossed gold lettering looked far too expensive for a joke. The names Rebecca and James Thornton meant nothing to me. Yet, according to this invitation, they planned to hold their wedding in my backyard in exactly 3 weeks. Standing on my porch, my morning coffee cooling in my hand, confusion gave way to disbelief. And disbelief quickly transformed into white-hot anger. My name is Michael Foster. I'm a 38-year-old architect who recently returned to my hometown of Willowbrook to restore my grandmother's Victorian farmhouse after her passing 6 months ago. The property had been in our family for over 100 years, a stunning 5-acre estate with gardens once featured in home and garden magazines during the 1980s. My grandmother, Eleanor Foster, was a respected botanist who transformed the grounds into a showpiece of native plants and heritage roses. When I inherited the estate, I took a sabbatical from my firm in Chicago to honor her memory by restoring the property to its former glory. The house needed serious work. The roof leaked in 3 places, the plumbing was temperamental, and the once vibrant gardens had grown wild after my grandmother's long illness. But beneath the neglect lay the bones of something magnificent. I took the invitation inside and called the number printed at the bottom. After several rings, a harried-sounding woman answered. "Hello, Thornton Caldwell Wedding," she said cheerfully. "Rebecca speaking." Her voice dripped with artificial sweetness. I explained calmly that there seemed to be some confusion about the venue for her wedding. "Oh, you must be calling about parking arrangements," she replied dismissively. "We've arranged for guests to park along Maple Lane, so your driveway won't be blocked." My patience evaporated like morning dew in August. "No, Miss Thornton. I'm calling because you've scheduled your wedding at my private residence without permission," I said flatly. "I'm Michael Foster, the owner of the property you've listed." There was a silence that lasted several heartbeats before Rebecca's voice returned. No longer syrupy, but sharp as a newly honed knife. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I've already paid the venue fee to the Willowbrook Heritage Association. Everything's been arranged for months. The Foster Gardens is a registered historical venue. It says so right on the town website." I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache forming. The property was never registered with any heritage association, and it was my private residence. I'd never given permission for any events. Rebecca's derisive laugh cut through the phone line. "Well, I have a contract that says otherwise. Take it up with Cynthia Morgan at the HOA. I have 200 guests coming in 3 weeks from out of state. This venue will be ready." Before I could respond, she hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in stunned silence. The Willowbrook Homeowners Association? I wasn't even a member. My grandmother had purposely purchased this land because it was outside the boundaries of that planned community. Determined, I searched online for information about this so-called Heritage Association. I found an official-looking website showcasing several historic properties available for wedding rentals, including my grandmother's house, listed as Foster Gardens. Victorian elegance for your special day. The description boasted mature gardens, a picturesque gazebo, and a charming historic farmhouse preserved as a community treasure. My blood pressure skyrocketed as I scrolled through recent photographs of my property, clearly taken without my knowledge or consent. The site listed Cynthia Morgan as the booking coordinator, with rental rates starting at $4,000 for a basic package. I knew the name immediately. Cynthia Morgan was president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA, the upscale development bordering my property. I'd met her briefly after moving in. When she'd appeared on my doorstep with a folder full of community guidelines she insisted applied to my land. I'd promptly tossed them in the recycling bin after explaining my property wasn't under her jurisdiction. I grabbed a jacket and drove straight to the HOA office, a small brick building in the center of Willowbrook Estates. The receptionist greeted me with rehearsed cheerfulness, but when I demanded to see Cynthia Morgan about the unauthorized use of my property, her smile faltered. 10 minutes later, I was ushered into a conference room where Cynthia sat at the head of an oval table, surrounded by 4 others who watched me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Cynthia's blonde bob was immaculately styled, her navy blazer pressed perfectly, pearls catching the light as she fixed me with an icy gaze. "Mr. Foster," she said with a tight smile, "what seems to be the problem?" The false concern in her voice made my skin crawl. "The problem, Ms. Morgan," I replied evenly, "is that you're advertising my property as a wedding venue without permission, taking money for bookings, and allowing strangers to plan events on my land." A ripple of whispers ran through the room, but Cynthia's expression remained unchanged. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said smoothly. "The Foster property was added to our Heritage Sites program last year. Your grandmother signed the agreement herself." She nodded to a man who slid a document toward me. I picked it up and immediately recognized a poor attempt at forging my grandmother's signature on a property use agreement dated 3 months before her death, when she was in hospice care and barely able to hold a pen. "This signature is forged," I stated flatly, feeling my pulse pounding. My grandmother was heavily medicated and physically incapable of signing anything. Besides, she never would have agreed to this. She bought this property specifically because it was outside HOA jurisdiction. I dropped the paper on the table as if it were contaminated. "I want all bookings canceled immediately. Remove my property from your website and refund any money you've taken." Cynthia's smile hardened into something predatory. "That's quite an accusation, Mr. Foster. The agreement is legally binding and witnessed by 2 board members. Your grandmother understood that maintaining a property of historical significance requires community support." A woman next to Cynthia nodded vigorously. "The Heritage Sites program helps preserve Willowbrook's character while generating maintenance funds. It's in everyone's best interest." I recognized her, Sharon Peterson, the town's luxury boutique owner. I scoffed. "I've received exactly $0 for upkeep. I've never agreed to any such arrangement. Where has this money been going?" Uncomfortable glances were exchanged. Cynthia cleared her throat. "There's a reserve fund established. We were planning to approach you about necessary improvements once you'd settled in. Previous bookings were made during the transition after your grandmother's passing." Her words sounded sweet, but I sensed desperation beneath. "How many?" I asked quietly. Cynthia blinked. Sharon jumped in. "Just 3 this season, the Thornton wedding this month and 2 more in June and July. All tasteful events, I assure you." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "I'll be speaking with my attorney immediately. In the meantime, you should start making calls to explain to these people that you've been selling access to property you don't own or control." I turned to leave, but Cynthia's voice stopped me. "Mr. Foster, I strongly advise against making this difficult. Willowbrook Estates represents over 300 homeowners with significant influence. The Heritage Sites program has been very popular, bringing tourism dollars to local businesses." I turned back slowly. "Is that a threat, Ms. Morgan?" Her smile returned, brittle as thin ice. "Simply a statement of fact. Sometimes it's better to be a team player." The implied threat followed me like a shadow as I drove to my grandmother's attorney, a family friend, who listened with growing alarm. "This is outrageous," he muttered, examining the forged agreement. "Eleanor would never have agreed to this. She was fiercely protective of her privacy. And this isn't even a good forgery." He promised to send a cease and desist letter immediately, but warned me Cynthia Morgan wielded significant political power. "This won't be a simple matter of legal right and wrong. It's going to get political." I nodded, already suspecting from Cynthia's veiled threat. "What do they stand to gain?" I asked. My attorney leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "More than money. Your grandmother's property is the last large parcel in that area not under HOA control. It's 5 acres of green space surrounded by dense development. I suspect this heritage program is just the first step in gaining control." He handed me a thick folder. "Eleanor suspected something like this. She left you the ammunition to defend it." Inside were land surveys, original deeds, and letters proving my grandmother had rejected offers to sell or incorporate the land. One letter from the city confirmed attempts to rezone or claim the property had been rejected. She knew they'd come after it, I murmured. Driving home, my mind raced with possibilities. The cease and desist letter would establish my legal position, but it wouldn't solve the immediate problem. The Thornton wedding was only 3 weeks away. And something told me Cynthia Morgan wouldn't back down easily. She had too much invested. Financially and in reputation. Back at the house, I walked the grounds seeing it anew. Not just my grandmother's beloved home, but a valuable piece of real estate others were scheming to control. Even in neglect, the gardens were breathtaking. Spring bulbs pushed through the soil in chaotic, beautiful profusion. The gazebo, though needing paint, stood gracefully in the center of what was once a rose garden. This was my family's legacy, and I was ready to fight for it. I could understand why brides would be drawn to this beautiful setting, but that didn't give anyone the right to trespass or profit from my property without permission. As evening fell, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, contemplating my next move. Suddenly, a beat-up blue pickup truck pulled into my driveway. Out stepped a tall, wiry man in his 70s, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who had spent a lifetime doing physical labor. It was Walter Jenkins, my grandmother's groundskeeper, who had retired shortly before her passing. "I heard you're having some trouble with that Morgan woman," he said as he approached the porch. "News travels fast in small towns. Mind if I join you?" I gestured to the empty chair beside me, and Walter settled in with a grunt of satisfaction. "Your grandmother would be spinning in her grave if she knew what they're trying to pull," he said without beating around the bush. "I've been watching them circle this place like vultures for years." Walter declined my offer of bourbon, but accepted a glass of water. "They started small," he continued. "First, comments about the height of the grass or branches hanging over the property line. Then letters about community standards and how the gardens could be shared resources." His weathered face twisted with disgust. "Your grandmother told Cynthia to pound sand." Those were her exact words. I was standing right here when she said it. I couldn't help but smile, picturing my gentle but fiercely independent grandmother delivering that message. So now they've escalated to forging her signature and selling access to the property, I mused. The question is, what do I do about the Thornton wedding in 3 weeks? Walter took a thoughtful sip of water. "Well, seems you've got 3 options. 1. Go along with it, let them hold their wedding, and fight the larger battle later. 2. Get your lawyer to shut it down and deal with the fallout from a disappointed bride and her 200 guests. Or 3. His eyes twinkled with mischief. You find a creative way to make sure nobody wants to have their fancy wedding here. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What did you have in mind? Walter chuckled. Your grandmother always said, sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to be spectacularly unreasonable yourself. Make it memorable. Over the next hour, Walter filled me in on the local politics I'd missed during my years away. Cynthia Morgan had turned the once manageable Willowbrook Estates HOA into her personal fiefdom, using strict rules to force out homeowners who opposed her. The Heritage Sites program began with willing owners, but as it grew profitable, properties were added without proper permission, always justified as preserving community character while generating funds, which, Walter said, seemed to disappear into administrative costs. Most people were too intimidated to fight back. Cynthia's husband made life difficult for local businesses through selective enforcement of city codes, and her social circle included every influential person in town. They closed ranks tight. He drained his glass and stood. But your grandmother taught me something important. Bullies only maintain power when people are afraid to challenge them. Eleanor Foster's grandson shouldn't be afraid of Cynthia Morgan. As his truck disappeared down the driveway, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wouldn't just defend my property. I'd make such a spectacular example of Cynthia's overreach that she'd never dare try this again. The next morning, a response to the cease and desist letter arrived, not from Cynthia, but from the HOA's attorney. The carefully worded document acknowledged my ownership, but insisted the heritage agreement was binding because of my grandmother's signature. warning that disrupting events would result in legal action. James, my lawyer, called to discuss next steps, but I already had a plan forming, one that would require precise timing and a bit of theatrical flair. "Hold off on responding," I told him. "I have an idea that might solve this problem more effectively than a legal battle." First, I researched everything I could about Rebecca Thornton, the bride unknowingly caught in Cynthia's scheme. Social media revealed she was a local realtor working for the same agency that handled most of Willowbrook Estate's property transactions. Her fiancé, James Caldwell, was a developer whose company built the newest section of the HOA community. The connections were clear. This wasn't just any wedding. It was a social and business alliance deeply embedded in Cynthia's power network. No wonder she was so determined to make it happen. Next, I reached out to several local businesses, carefully avoiding those close to the HOA. I made appointments and explained the situation. I was surprised how many people were eager to help once they understood what was really going on. Walter was right. Beneath Willowbrook's picture-perfect exterior simmered significant resentment toward Cynthia's heavy-handed tactics. By the end of the week, I had everything ready for what my grandmother would have called a strategic demonstration of consequences. The Saturday before the wedding, I kept radio silence with Cynthia and the HOA attorney, letting them believe I was intimidated by their threats. At precisely 7:30 a.m., just late enough to be legal under the town's noise ordinance, but early enough for maximum attention, 3 large trucks rumbled up my driveway. The first brought a portable toilet company, placing 20 bright blue units across my front lawn. The second was a pest control crew, setting up large yellow warning signs around the property. The third, and most impressive, arrived from Johnson's Demolition and Excavation, complete with a small bulldozer on a trailer. I warned my neighbors, explaining truthfully I was starting major landscape renovations. Most were sympathetic once they heard about Cynthia's overreach. Within 30 minutes, curious onlookers gathered on the sidewalk. 45 minutes later, a sleek silver Mercedes screeched into my driveway. Cynthia Morgan emerged, stormy as a thundercloud, sunglasses pushed up into her perfect hair, dressed in tennis clothes she never seemed to wear. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing wildly at the chaos. I smiled pleasantly, clipboard in hand, checking off my list. "Good morning, Cynthia. Just getting the property ready for some major renovations. The entire backyard is being redesigned, new drainage, excavation for a koi pond, complete replanting." I gestured at the bulldozer being unloaded. "We're starting Monday bright and early." Cynthia's face passed through confusion, disbelief, then dawning horror. "Monday? You can't be serious. The Thornton Caldwell wedding is next Saturday." I feigned innocence. "Wedding? Oh, you must be referring to the event you scheduled on my property without permission." "Yes, I suppose this would interfere with that, wouldn't it?" I tapped my chin thoughtfully. Terrible timing, but since I never agreed to host any wedding, and since this is my private property, I'm free to make whatever improvements I see fit. The portable toilets are for the work crew, by the way. They'll be here at least 3 weeks. As if on cue, Rebecca Thornton's car pulled in behind Cynthia's. The bride-to-be leaped out, phone clutched in hand, eyes wide with distress at the sight of the toilets and pest control signs. "I just got calls from 3 different neighbors," she cried. Cynthia turned to Rebecca, struggling to keep calm. "Rebecca, darling, there's been a slight misunderstanding with Mr. Foster about the Heritage Sites program. I'm sure we can work something out." She turned back to me, voice lowered. "Be reasonable, Michael. We can discuss compensation, or some sort of compromise." I shook my head, keeping my pleasant tone but standing firm. "There's no misunderstanding, Cynthia. You forged my grandmother's signature and sold access to my property without permission. I've decided to exercise my right to improve my property instead of pursuing legal action." I turned to Rebecca, whose mascara was already running, tears welling in her eyes. "Miss Thornton, I'm truly sorry you've been caught in the middle. Cynthia never had the right to offer my property as a venue. Whatever money you paid was taken under false pretenses." Rebecca glared at Cynthia, confusion giving way to anger. You told me everything was arranged. You said the new owner honored all existing bookings. Cynthia's composure cracked. It's a simple miscommunication. Mr. Foster is being difficult over a technicality. I interrupted smoothly. Forgery isn't a technicality, Cynthia. Neither is fraud. I pulled out my phone, showing Rebecca the forged document, supposedly signed when my grandmother was barely conscious in hospice care. The HOA has been collecting venue fees for my property without my knowledge. I never received a penny. Color drained from Rebecca's face as the truth sank in. I paid $8,000 for this venue, rentals, catering, flowers. Everything is designed around this garden setting. Where am I supposed to find another location in 7 days? Her voice rose, drawing the attention of workers and the growing crowd of onlookers. Cynthia grabbed Rebecca's arm, trying to steer her away. Let's discuss this privately. Rebecca shook her off, years of wedding stress focusing into a laser of rage aimed at Cynthia. You promised me the most beautiful venue in Willowbrook. You showed me pictures. You handled everything. And now you're telling me it was all a lie. Her shouting echoed to neighbors gathered nearby. Cynthia's attempts to silence her only fueled the fury. 200 guests, Cynthia. Some flying in from California. Where are they supposed to go? Your backyard. The suggestion seemed to horrify Cynthia, whose own modest property wasn't suited for such an event. I stepped back, letting the scene unfold without interference. More cars arrived, Rebecca's mother, her wedding planner, and friends summoned by frantic texts. The quiet Saturday morning had transformed into the public spectacle Cynthia had desperately tried to avoid. With every new arrival, the story spread. How the HOA president sold access to property she didn't control, forged an elderly woman's signature, and how this wedding venue didn't actually exist. Watching Cynthia's carefully crafted authority crumble was, admittedly, satisfying. But I felt genuine sympathy for Rebecca and her fiancé, who arrived shell-shocked. As chaos peaked with Rebecca sobbing and Cynthia scrambling for control, I quietly approached James Caldwell, the groom. Mr. Caldwell, a word in private, I said, leading him away from the crowd to the front porch. I want to be clear. My issue is with Cynthia Morgan and the HOA, not with you and Rebecca. You're innocent victims here. James ran a hand through his hair, watching his wedding plans implode. What do you suggest we do? Rebecca's been planning this for over a year. I smiled slightly. I actually have a suggestion, if you're interested. I know the owner of Willow Creek Lodge. They had a cancellation for next Saturday. The venue's available, including gardens and ballroom. It's not identical to this setting, but it's beautiful in its own right. James stared in disbelief. How do you know this? I shrugged. I made some calls. When I realized this confrontation was inevitable, I didn't want their wedding to become collateral damage in my dispute with the HOA. So, I handed James a business card with the lodge manager's contact information. They're expecting your call, I said. And because they're just as disgusted by Cynthia's behavior as I am, they're offering a significant discount. James studied me for a long moment, then extended his hand. Thank you. This is unexpectedly decent of you, he said. I shook his hand firmly. Consider it a wedding gift, and maybe a reminder that not everyone in Willowbrook operates like Cynthia does. As James returned to Rebecca with this new potential solution, I noticed Walter Jenkins among the spectators. His weathered face broke into a broad grin as he gave me a thumbs up from behind Cynthia's back. The theatrical display had done exactly what I hoped, publicly exposing Cynthia's methods in a way she couldn't sweep under the rug or dismiss as a private dispute. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. By afternoon, local social media groups buzzed with the story, complete with photos of portable toilets and pest control signs. Several other property owners came forward with similar stories of being pressured to join the Heritage Sites program, though none had faced outright forgery. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Cynthia faced uncomfortable questions about the program's finances. Nearly $50,000 in booking fees collected over the past year had been diverted into an administrative account funding renovations to the HOA clubhouse and an extravagant board appreciation dinner. On Sunday, James called, chuckling as he delivered the news. The HOA board has placed Cynthia on administrative leave pending investigation. They're sending formal apologies to everyone involved and offering full refunds. He paused, savoring the next bit of information. The city council, including Cynthia's husband, has formally acknowledged that your property remains outside HOA jurisdiction with no heritage designation, unless you choose to pursue one. I smiled, picturing Cynthia's husband distancing himself from her schemes to save his political career, and Rebecca's wedding. I hear the wedding relocated to Willow Creek Lodge with minimal drama. The lodge owner is apparently delighted by the last-minute booking and the publicity. He's even throwing in a free champagne toast for the guests. James' voice grew serious. You handled this brilliantly, Michael. Your grandmother would be proud of your backbone, and your compassion for the innocent parties caught in the middle. Coming from someone who had known Eleanor Foster for decades, that was high praise indeed. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The property was secure, Cynthia's overreach exposed, and the wedding would proceed without disruption, just not in my backyard. By Monday morning, most of the theatrical elements of my protest were gone. The portable toilets and pest control signs were removed. I kept the demolition equipment a bit longer, partly because I actually planned to improve the landscaping, and partly as a visible reminder that I wasn't to be trifled with. As I reviewed plans with the excavation foreman, a modest sedan pulled into the driveway. Sharon Peterson emerged, looking less polished than at the HOA meeting. "Mr. Foster," she called, approaching cautiously. I invited her onto the porch. She declined coffee but seemed grateful to sit. "I owe you an apology," she began. Most of the board had no idea Cynthia was adding properties without permission. We thought all participants had voluntarily joined the program. She twisted her hands nervously. When questions arose about certain properties, Cynthia assured us everything was properly documented. The forgery, that was entirely her doing, not a board action. I studied her face and saw genuine remorse. "And the money?" I asked. "Were you aware of where the booking fees went?" Sharon winced. "We were told funds were held in escrow for maintenance, minus administrative costs. It wasn't until the emergency meeting yesterday that we saw the real accounts." She shook her head slowly. 90% was administrative, with only 10% reserved for the properties, and even that hadn't been distributed. She straightened and met my eyes. "I've resigned from the board. Several others have too. We're recommending a complete restructuring of the HOA leadership with proper checks and balances." I nodded, appreciating her candor. "What will happen to Cynthia?" I asked. Her expression hardened. "There's talk of criminal charges for forgery and misappropriation of funds. At minimum, she's finished in Willowbrook. Her husband faces questions about what he knew. And her real estate license is under review." She stood, hesitated, then said quietly, "Your grandmother was respected here, Mr. Foster. What Cynthia did, using her name and property without permission, that wasn't right. I should have asked more questions." With that, she returned to her car. In the days that followed, several board members made similar apologies. The following Saturday, as Rebecca and James exchanged vows at Willow Creek Lodge with their 200 guests, I was in my grandmother's gardens, hands deep in fertile soil, planting the first of many rose bushes to restore the property to its former glory. Walter Jenkins had come out of retirement to help, bringing cuttings he'd preserved from Eleanor's original plants. "You know," he said as we worked side by side, "your grandmother always said gardens teach patience and consequence. Plant the right seeds, tend them properly, and eventually you reap the beauty you've sown. Same goes for dealing with people, I suppose." I smiled, brushing dirt from my hands as I looked around the property, now securely protected from those who would exploit it. "She was a wise woman," I agreed. "And now everyone in Willowbrook knows her grandson inherited more than just her land." Walter chuckled, creasing his weathered face with genuine amusement. "Indeed they do. Between the portable toilets and bulldozer, you made an impression they won't soon forget." In the distance, new signs were being installed at the entrance to Willowbrook Estates, announcing the newly elected HOA board and their commitment to transparent, respectful community governance. As spring deepened into summer, the gardens began their slow transformation back to life. The gazebo received a fresh coat of paint. Paths were cleared and re-gravelled. The first roses bloomed in spectacular profusion. Cynthia Morgan and her husband sold their Willowbrook Estates home and moved to Florida, their departure hastened by legal consequences, a 2-year probation sentence for fraud and forgery, plus substantial financial penalties. The Heritage Sites program was disbanded and replaced by a voluntary historical registry, with clear guidelines and transparent financial management. In a surprising twist, Rebecca and James sent me a thank you note and a bottle of expensive champagne after their honeymoon. "Thanks for saving our wedding and exposing the truth," the card read. The lodge was perfect, and everyone agreed the drama made for a much better story than a typical ceremony. Enclosed was a photo of the happy couple in Willow Creek's gardens, looking not at all traumatized by their last-minute venue change. I placed the picture on my mantle, a reminder that sometimes the path to justice takes unexpected turns. A year later, with the gardens fully restored and house renovations complete, I hosted a garden party for neighbors, including many from Willowbrook Estates, who had once viewed my property with envy or resentment. Under twinkling lights strung through old oak trees, with music playing softly and the scent of roses filling the air, former HOA board members even commented on how right it felt to see the Foster property restored to its glory. "Your grandmother would be proud," Walter told me as we watched guests wander illuminated paths. "Not just of the gardens, but how you protected her legacy." I raised my glass in a silent toast to Eleanor Foster, whose foresight and strength guided me even in her absence. In the end, the wedding that never happened led to something far more meaningful, a true community gathering based on respect, not coercion or fraud. And if the occasional bride asks about hosting a legitimate, properly arranged wedding in these beautiful gardens, well, that would be entirely my choice. Made with full consent, and without a single portable toilet or bulldozer in sight.